Welcome back to the deep dive. Okay, so today we're unpacking a question that, well, has probably crossed everyone's mind at some point, right? Whether you're deep in a creative field, maybe starting something new, or honestly just trying to figure out a tricky problem.
Yeah, that big question.
Where do genuinely new, impactful ideas actually come from? And I don't just mean, good ideas or even great ones. I mean those truly novel concepts that somehow manage to cut through all the noise out there.
Especially now, yeah, in this like hyper-connected digital world.
Exactly. Ideas that resonate in a way you almost couldn't have predicted.
It feels like an age-old mystery, doesn't it?
Hmm.
We often think of creativity as this almost mystical lightning bolt, totally unpredictable.
Right. Like you just have to wait for it to strike.
But our sources today, they suggest it's maybe far more systematic than we tend to imagine. Less magic, maybe more.
Yeah.
Architecture.
Architecture. I like that. And yeah, our deep dive today really digs into this mystery using two fascinating sources. First up, we've got Redefine Imaginify. It's this framework that offers a really strategic, almost dare I say, scientific way to cultivate creativity.
Moving beyond just waiting for inspiration, yeah, towards something deeper.
And then we're pairing that with innovationaries. This one grounds those ideas with actual data, case studies.
It shows us how these really novel ideas, once they're out there, how they actually resonate and gain traction online.
Even when they seem to defy the algorithms.
Especially then, often defying the very algorithms that are supposed to predict success is quite interesting.
Okay, so our core mission today is basically to follow the path of an idea, from that initial spark, that flicker, what our sources are calling the ignition phase,
Right.
all the way through to how it takes root, makes an impact, especially online, even when, like you said, it seems to bypass those normal algorithmic predictions.
But here's where we pivot a bit today.
Yeah, this is where it gets, I think, really interesting and maybe a bit more profound. Because while Redefine Imaginify gives us these powerful tools for creating profound novelty,
They are powerful.
definitely. But our focus today is going to shift. It's shifting beyond just how you generate these ideas to maybe a more critical question. What kind of novelty is actually ethically responsible to create and to unleash?
Especially when it takes on a life of its own, which these novel ideas often do.
Exactly. This is all about what we're calling the conscious architect's ethos. It's about navigating the, frankly, huge responsibilities that come with creating something truly new, something unscripted.
And that ethical layer, that's precisely why this conversation feels so essential right now. Because the kind of creative power described in these sources is not just for, personal expression or fulfillment.
No, it goes way beyond that.
It carries this immense potential for actually shaping collective thought, for influencing public discourse. And that comes with weight.
Okay, so let's unpack this concept then. The conscious architect. Redefine Imaginify. It doesn't see the creator as like a passive recipient just waiting around for some muse to show up.
No waiting involved, really.
Instead, it positions you, the creator, as a conscious architect of your own inspiration, which, again, I love that term. It's not about luck or hoping for a stroke of genius.
It's much more active.
It's a holistic, systematic way to cultivate creativity. And it does this by strategically managing, and this is key, the outside world's inputs and cultivating the inner world's synthesis.
Both sides of that equation, inputs and synthesis.
Think of it like a deliberate, almost scientific approach to sparking genuinely original thought.
It's really about recognizing that profound inspiration isn't just magic, it's a process the source calls synthesis transformation.
Synthesis transformation, meaning...
Well, it means you're not just pulling ideas out of thin air. You're not a magician. Instead, you're skillfully remixing, reinterpreting diverse existing ideas, taking bits and pieces from here and there.
And making something genuinely new out of them.
Exactly. Your brain essentially acts as this internal architect. It takes in all this raw input, these raw materials, and shapes them into something original. And the sources, they highlight several key mechanisms for fueling this internal architect, for generating that unique novelty.
And some of these mechanisms, they might actually surprise you because they kind of challenge our usual ideas about where creativity happens, right? Where it thrives.
Totally. The first one involves engaging with specific kinds of environments, often ones we tend to overlook or maybe even find a bit mundane.
Right. Most of us probably picture the ideal creative space as, I don't know, a perfectly organized studio Or maybe a quiet, inspiring retreat somewhere beautiful.
That's the classic image, isn't it?
Mhm.
But Redefine Imaginify argues almost the opposite sometimes. It emphasizes places that actively shake up your routine, disrupt your patterns.
Yeah.
Yeah, places that even give you new kinds of sensory input, maybe slightly jarring input. The core idea is really about nudging your mind out of its usual comfortable, well-worn tracks, forcing a cognitive shift.
So maybe not a perfectly curated creative sanctuary, but I don't know, an airport lounge. Is that the kind of thing we're talking about?
Exactly that. The framework actually introduces this concept of liminal spaces.
Liminal spaces.
The use of those transitional sort of in-between zones we often just pass through, maybe find a bit boring or even annoying sometimes. Think airport departure lounges, yeah.
Or laundromats.
Laundromats, really.
Or the waiting room at the doctor's office. Even your daily commute stuck in traffic. Or, the classic example, the shower.
Ah, the shower idea. Okay.
Is there places where you're not actively doing anything specific, right?
Yeah.
But you're not fully relaxed either. You're just sort of suspended in between.
And most of us, let's be honest, in those moments, we're probably just trying to kill time. We immediately reach for our phones, right, to distract ourselves.
We do. It's almost automatic. So why are these seemingly unproductive, maybe even irritating places actually powerful for creativity? What's the argument there?
Well, the argument is actually quite compelling when you break it down. In these liminal spaces, your usual routines, your normal thought patterns, they aren't running.
Okay.
The familiar anchors of your thoughts, maybe your office setup, your home environment, your daily schedule, all that stuff, they're all temporarily absent. And because those anchors are gone, your mind becomes, well, unmoored. It's no longer tied down by your immediate to-do list or your habitual ways of thinking.
Okay, so if my brain's usual routines are interrupted, what's happening cognitively? What does that do?
Well, think about your brain's typical pathways. They become incredibly efficient through repetition, but they also get rigid, like deep grooves or mental ruts we fall into.
Yeah, I know those, right?
Liminal spaces act kind of like hitting a reset button on those pathways.
Yeah.
They create what Redefine Imaginify calls cognitive white space.
Cognitive white space.
Now, this isn't totally empty mental space. It's more like a temporary vacuum where your mind is almost forced to make new, unexpected connections because those old dominant pathways are disengaged. They're not being constantly triggered.
So in that unstructured mental space,
Novel ideas, previously unlinked thoughts, they can surface. Ideas that probably wouldn't just pop up when you're laser focused on a specific task or when you're stuck in a very familiar environment that triggers all the usual thoughts. The insight here is really these dead times, these moments we usually try to fill, they're actually fertile ground for your brain to break free and forge new connections. Connections you'd likely never make while deeply focused or just going through the motions.
I can actually sort of feel that. It's like, when you're driving a familiar route completely on autopilot versus suddenly having to take a detour.
Yes, good analogy.
On the detour, your mind has to wake up, pay attention differently, make new connections just to navigate. So maybe sitting in a laundromat, I don't know, watching the rhythmic tumbling of clothes could unexpectedly connect to a rhythm in a piece of music you're working on.
Precisely. Or the flow of water could connect to a complex design problem you've been wrestling with. The mundane becomes a trigger because it disrupts your expected flow of thought, your usual inputs.
It's less about the place itself being inherently inspiring then. Like the laundromat isn't necessarily beautiful.
Not necessarily. It's more about how that environment forces your brain to operate differently. It's a deliberate disruption of habit. It allows your brain to kind of play around in a new way, to seek out novel associations when its usual diet of information and stimulation is temporarily withheld.
Okay, got it. So that's one side, these disruptive, pattern-breaking liminal spaces. But what about the other classic source of inspiration we always hear about nature? Does the source talk about that? The calm, restorative side.
It absolutely does. And it connects nature to inspiration through another really interesting concept, effortless attention.
Effortless attention. That sounds almost contradictory, doesn't it? Attention usually feels like effort, like work.
It does,
Yeah.
usually. But think about the kind of attention you use when you're just, say, watching waves roll in on a beach, or clouds drifting across the sky, or maybe just listening to leaves rustling in a forest.
Okay, yeah, I know that feeling.
You're observing, you're present, but it doesn't feel like work, does it? It's not strenuous mental effort. It's more of a gentle, wandering focus. Sometimes it's called soft fascination.
Soft fascination. Fascination.
And this is fundamentally different from the kind of directed attention you need for, say, coding or writing a detailed report or solving a complex math problem.
Right, that takes focus, that takes energy.
Exactly. The insight here is these calm, restorative environments, they promote this soft fascination. And that acts almost like a mental palate cleanser. It rejuvenates your brain, reduces fatigue, and opens up space for spontaneous connections to happen.
Okay, I think I get the distinction now. Your mind is engaged, but it's not being taxed. It's like letting your gaze just sweep across a landscape versus staring intently at one specific point on it.
That's a great way to put it.
So, what are the specific benefits of this state for creativity, according to Redefine Imaginify?
Well, arguably the biggest benefit is that this relaxed state actively and significantly reduces mental fatigue, which makes intuitive sense, right? Our brains get tired from constant demands, endless notifications, information overload.
Definitely. Mine does.
So giving your brain this kind of break, this effortless attention break,
Mm-hmm.
it creates more mental capacity. It's like clearing out all the background apps running on your phone or computer. You're freeing up valuable cognitive resources.
And you mentioned earlier it allows the default mode network to kick in. What is that exactly?
Right, the DMN, the default mode network. It's a network of brain regions that becomes more active when we're not focused on the outside world.
Yeah.
It's linked to things like mind wandering, daydreaming, internal thought, remembering the past, thinking about the future. And importantly, it's strongly associated with creative problem solving and making those unexpected connections between seemingly disparate ideas. It's kind of like your brain's background processing unit.
Ah, okay.
So when you're not actively focused on an external task, the DMN is busy. It's synthesizing information, connecting memories, exploring possibilities. By reducing mental fatigue and allowing for this effortless attention, you're basically opening up cognitive space for your imagination. You're decluttering the mental workspace, making room for ideas to sort of bump into each other without the pressure of an overworked, stressed-out mind.
So we're seeing two really distinct types of environmental triggers here. Both seem vital, but they work in almost opposite ways.
That's right.
You've got the deliberate disruption and pattern breaking in liminal spaces on one hand, and then the relaxed openness and restoration in nature, promoting effortless attention on the other.
Exactly. It really reframes how you might think about your surroundings, doesn't it? Your
Yeah.
environment isn't just this passive background noise.
No, it's an active tool, something you can intentionally use for creative thinking.
Precisely. It lays the groundwork for generating genuine novelty, moving away from just rehashing the same familiar patterns over and over. And this already starts building content, ideas, solutions that have a distinct voice, something that doesn't just sound like everything else already out there.
Okay, so that covers the environmental side, the spaces we inhabit. Now, what are the inputs? The stuff we feed our brains. Redefine Imaginify talks a lot about the creative works we consume, books, movies, art, music, whatever.
It does.
But I'm guessing it's not just about passively consuming more stuff, right? Because that feels like a common trap, thinking that just pouring more information in will automatically equal more creativity.
You're exactly right. It's definitely not just about quantity. That can actually lead to overwhelm. The source uses a really powerful concept here. It sounds a bit academic, maybe, but it's incredibly practical. Narrative cross-pollination.
Narrative cross-pollination. Okay, break that down. What does that actually mean in practice?
It means actively, intentionally seeking out stories, styles, themes, emotional tones, even structures from wildly different, unconnected areas or disciplines. It's basically the exact opposite of sticking within your comfort zone or your usual filter bubble.
So going way outside your normal lane.
Way outside. The goal is to deliberately create intellectual friction. You do this by exposing yourself to ideas and forms that don't normally mix, that maybe even seem to clash.
Intellectual friction. That sounds uncomfortable.
It can be, but the insight here is this friction, born from seeking out wildly diverse and even clashing inputs, is actually the engine for truly new insights. It literally forces your brain to build entirely new neural pathways.
Okay, so you're saying not just reading within my favorite genre, for example, but actively seeking out dissonance. Why seek out that clash? It feels like it could just be confusing or messy.
Well, that's kind of where the magic happens, according to the framework. It argues that forcing your brain to wrestle with these wildly different inputs, things that don't intuitively fit together, actively stimulates the creation of new neural connections.
How so?
Your brain is fundamentally a pattern-matching machine, right? It's always looking for connections, trying to make sense of things. When you feed it diverse, almost clashing input. Let's say you spend an evening deep diving into, I don't know, quantum physics concepts, and then immediately immerse yourself in ancient Greek mythology.
Whoa, okay. Big jump.
Right. Your brain has to work much harder to find, or more likely, create some kind of link, some kind of resonance or contrast between those things. It breaks your existing ways of thinking, challenges your underlying assumptions, and helps you form entirely new mental models or frameworks. The effort of trying to reconcile those differences, to find some coherence in the apparent dissonance, that's what generates truly new insight.
So it's not about finding obvious, easy links between things?
No, not at all. It's about forcing your mind to invent new frameworks, new ways of seeing, precisely because the inputs are so different.
Can you give us a really vivid example, something concrete from Redefine Imaginify that illustrates this kind of cross-pollination and the friction it creates?
Okay, yeah. The source uses this great example. Imagine spending some time really deep in a complex cyberpunk novel. Futuristic tech, gritty social commentary, AI consciousness, that whole dark, neon-drenched aesthetic.
Got it. Blade Runner vibes.
Exactly. Then, right after finishing that, you deliberately immerse yourself in Renaissance art. Maybe you spend hours studying the intricate symbolism in a Botticelli painting, or the anatomical precision of Michelangelo's sculptures, or reading about the philosophical underpinnings of that entire era.
Wow. Okay, cyberpunk dystopia straight into Renaissance beauty and philosophy. That's a massive leap. My brain feels the whiplash just thinking about putting those two together. Isn't that just
Infusing.
disorienting?
And that feeling, that whiplash, that tension you just described, that's exactly where Redefine Imaginify says the creative magic happens. These unexpected juxtapositions, they don't just sit there quietly side by side in your mind.
They clash.
They clash, they collide. Different creative ideas, forms, emotional tones, philosophical outlooks, they're crashing together in your head. And the friction itself isn't the problem. According to this framework, it's the engine. It's like having these incredibly diverse raw materials in your mental laboratory, and you're consciously mixing them, maybe even banging them together to spark something genuinely new.
Like a chemical reaction.
It's an active, almost chemical reaction in your mind, maybe like a mental alchemy, where the friction is the heat needed for transformation.
Okay, so this clash, this alchemy, it leads to something genuinely new, something with maybe unique advantages in our current digital world. Is that the core idea?
That's a huge part of it. Because think about algorithms, especially online. What are they? Fundamentally.
Pattern matchers, right? Looking for things that fit what's already popular or what worked before.
Exactly. Algorithms are essentially designed to look backward, to find what fits existing trends, what resembles past successes. They try to predict future engagement based on past data, optimizing by recognizing and promoting existing patterns.
But the internal architect, fueled by this narrative cross-pollination.
That architect thrives on creating new patterns, unexpected connections. It's inherently forward-looking, not backward-looking.
So this implies that the most creative, the most genuinely novel stuff, the output of this process, might actually, paradoxically, fail the algorithm test at first, precisely because it's too different.
Precisely. Doesn't neatly fit into existing categories or match established patterns that the algorithms are trained to recognize.
So the most impactful ideas, maybe in the long run, could be the very ones that initially confuse the algorithms. Because they don't fit any existing box. They're those weird cyberpunk Renaissance hybrids.
That's the argument.
Yeah.
And Research Innovation Areas, the other source, backs this up empirically. It suggests that truly novel content might struggle algorithmically at first because the systems literally don't know where to place it. It doesn't match the known success patterns they're looking for.
There's a payoff, right? If it manages to break through anyway, a significant one.
Yes, a huge one. Innovation Areas highlights that once these genuinely novel ideas do manage to connect with people, maybe through a small initial audience, or just chance, they often have a deeper stickiness and shareability.
Why? What makes them stickier?
Because humans, actual people, not algorithms, recognize and are often drawn to the novelty. Algorithms might ignore it because it breaks the pattern, but humans often find it compelling because it breaks the pattern. It feels fresh, authentic, different.
Okay.
And this human recognition allows these creations to sometimes explode through sheer word of mouth. They cut through the endless noise online precisely because they're different, bypassing those conventional algorithmic gatekeepers.
So that distinct voice, the uniqueness baked into it from the synthesis process, that becomes its own hook.
Exactly. The surprise, the fresh perspective, the unexpected blend that draws people in. It's not successful despite being different. It's successful because it's different.
That's really fascinating. So if you do manage to blend, say, cyberpunk and Renaissance art in a meaningful way, the result has this inherent, maybe even startling uniqueness. That unexpected blend becomes its own powerful hook. It grabs attention because it's different, not because it neatly fits a trend.
And this represents what the sources call an unforeseen power of resonance and autonomy. Ideas spreading widely, organically, autonomously, often beyond the creator's initial control, or certainly beyond what algorithms would have predicted based on past data.
Wow. So the most unique stuff might actually have the most viral potential, even if it takes a non-traditional path.
Potentially, yes. Innovationaries apparently offers case studies of content that initially flew way under the algorithmic radar, but then just exploded organically through human sharing, through people recognizing its distinctiveness and wanting to talk about it. It really changes how you might think about everything you consume, doesn't it?
It does. It's not just passive entertainment or information gathering anymore.
Not if you adopt this conscious architect mindset. This framework guides you to become a much more proactive curator of your mind's inputs. You start seeing everything not just for what it is on the surface, but for what it could become when combined uniquely by your internal architect.
You're constantly building this vast mental library of bits and pieces, all ready to be remixed in novel ways.
Exactly. And the research seems to suggest that audiences are genuinely hungry for that kind of novelty, maybe increasingly tired of the predictable, craving authenticity and the unexpected.
It really integrates the environment, the liminal spaces, the nature walks, and the inputs, the cross-pollination into a single dynamic system for creativity.
It's about designing your whole creative ecosystem, both your physical spaces and your intellectual diet, to actively encourage that synthesis transformation. Yeah. You're not waiting around for a muse. You're actively setting the table for profound inspiration to occur.
It really challenges that notion that creativity is just some innate gift you either have or you don't.
Completely. It suggests it's a dynamic process, something you can understand, you can nurture, you can even optimize through deliberate choices about your environment and your inputs. It empowers everyone to potentially be a conscious architect of their own inspiration.
An architect of inspiration. That phrase is incredibly empowering. But,
Yeah.
okay, as we talk about this power, the power of the internal architect to generate these genuinely new ideas, ideas that can cut through noise, influence people rapidly, sometimes spreading almost autonomously, it immediately brings up something critical.
Yeah, the but.
The but. Something that Redefine Imaginify, while explaining how this incredible novelty happens, doesn't explicitly map out in detail. The ethics. The profound responsibilities that inevitably come with wielding that kind of creative power.
And that's exactly where this conversation has to shift, doesn't it?
Yeah.
From the mechanics of creativity to a deeper philosophical inquiry. Redefine Imaginify gives you the blueprint for profound novelty, for making things that really resonate.
Yeah.
But the power it describes, creating these sticky, shareable ideas that can spread globally at lightning speed, bypassing normal checks and balances that inherently raises immense ethical questions. And the source doesn't really hand you an ethical guidebook.
So the burden, the moral compass, it falls entirely on the creator, on the architect.
It seems so. The question fundamentally moves from how do I generate novelty to what kind of novelty is actually ethically responsible for me to create and then unleash into the world.
Okay, let's really unpack this then. This amplified moral compass for the conscious architect. What does it truly mean when your creations have this unforeseen power of resonance and autonomy? What are the implications?
Well, first off, it means the sheer scale of potential impact is amplified dramatically. When ideas aren't just average but are specifically generated through methods designed for novelty and resonance, maybe even designed to be viral in an organic sense, their potential for both good and harm is significantly magnified.
Right. It's not just a personal blog post anymore, maybe.
Exactly. It stops being merely a matter of personal expression and takes on immense public impact. Think about it. A genuinely unique piece of content, something truly novel, might reach audiences who are completely unprepared for it, maybe lacking the necessary context to understand it fully.
Why unprepared?
Precisely because it's so novel. It might defy easy categorization, it might bypass the established gatekeepers or trusted curators who would normally provide context. If your idea is truly new, people might share it not because they fully grasp its nuances or implications, but simply because it feels different, compelling, maybe even shocking.
That's heavy. And then there's this other layer. The idea that the creative process itself, by forming these new patterns, new pathways in people's minds, It actually influences future thinking.
Yes, our creations aren't just static products consumed and forgotten. The really resonant ones, the truly novel ones, they can actually reshape collective thought, culture, and understanding. They become part of the mental furniture for others.
So what does this all mean then? Does the creator, the architect, have some kind of implicit obligation to consider the societal implications of their disruptive ideas?
That's the core ethical question this raises. If the Redefine Imaginify framework actively values disruption, breaking thought patterns, which it clearly does, that's where the novelty comes from. What happens if those new pathways you create are potentially harmful?
For example?
What if they inadvertently contribute to misinformation, or deepen societal divisions, or create unproductive, even damaging thought loops in people's minds? Suddenly, the creator isn't just an architect of ideas.
They're potentially an architect of future thinking itself. Wow.
So the ethical question isn't just about what you create, but what impact that creation is likely to have on the broader consciousness, on the culture. You're directly influencing how others might perceive the world and interact with it long after you've released your creation.
Which brings us back to the inputs, doesn't it?
Absolutely. This really emphasizes the ethical dimension inherent in that whole process the source describes. The internal architect's capacity to actively find those inputs, choose the right ones, and then skillfully synthesize them within ourselves, making original meaning out of all that external stuff.
So the choice of inputs,
And the nature of the synthesis.
they become morally charged. It's not just about what sparks your creativity anymore.
Right. Choosing to immerse yourself in certain narratives, certain sources, certain ideologies. It isn't just about feeding your personal creative engine. It's about consciously curating the kind of raw material that will eventually shape something that goes out into the collective imagination. That's a significant ethical consideration right there at the very input stage.
So it demands a proactive ethical stance starting way before you even publish or share anything.
Exactly. It's about asking yourself from the beginning, am I deliberately seeking inputs that might lead to something ultimately divisive or harmful just because it feels edgy or novel? Or am I consciously striving for a synthesis that could potentially foster connection, nuance, and deeper understanding? The framework doesn't explicitly spell this out, but it feels like a natural and absolutely crucial extension of the power it describes.
Okay. And the third ethical point you touched on earlier was about integrity. Redefine Imaginify emphasizes creating something genuinely unique, finding your distinct voice.
That's central to it.
But in the digital world, once an idea gains that organic traction, once it starts spreading autonomously, you said it enters this dynamic ecosystem of constant digital replication and modification.
Right. It gets shared, screenshotted, quoted, memed, remixed.
So what is the ethical challenge there? You called it protecting the integrity of our unique vision. What does that involve?
This highlights a really profound tension, I think. The distinct voice and the baked-in uniqueness that Redefine Imaginify's process helps create, that's precisely what allows these ideas to stand out and gain traction in the first place.
Okay.
But once these novel ideas achieve that organic traction, once they become beyond algorithmic prediction and start spreading person to person, they're no longer static objects under the creator's control. They are instantly replicated, remixed, recontextualized, and often significantly modified by countless other users online.
And that raises the question.
Does the conscious architect, the person who meticulously curated their environments, carefully selected their inputs, and painstakingly synthesized something genuinely original, do they also bear the ethical responsibility for how that idea is interpreted, recontextualized, or potentially misused once it gains that autonomous, widespread resonance?
That feels like a huge burden. It's about the unpredictable life cycle of an idea in this incredibly fast, freely replicating digital world, especially for an idea that's so novel it maybe defies easy categorization or control in the first place.
It's incredibly challenging. So what happens when your creation, born of careful, nuanced synthesis, is then taken completely out of context, stripped of its subtleties, or worse, used as a soundbite or a meme to promote something simplistic, or maybe even antithetical to your original intent?
And the source, Redefine Imaginify, it doesn't really offer concrete strategies for protecting that integrity, does it? It sort of leaves this as a fundamental burden for the creator to wrestle with.
It really does. It describes how to make the powerful novel thing, but not necessarily how to shepherd it through the digital wilderness once it's loose. Imagine, say, an artist creates a deeply nuanced piece exploring a complex social issue. It's full of subtle meaning, ambiguity even.
Right.
If that image goes viral, but then gets reduced to a simplistic meme promoting a black and white, maybe even harmful message, How much responsibility does the original artist bear for that downstream reinterpretation?
It's tough.
The ethical challenge really lies in this paradox. The very uniqueness that gives the idea its power and allows it to spread organically also makes it inherently harder to control, harder to keep tethered to its original context and intent. It forces creators to grapple with the uncomfortable possibility of their unique vision being distorted, diluted, or even weaponized out there in the digital commons.
So, pulling this whole ethical dimension together, it seems like the entire cycle inputs feeding our internal architect, leading to creations, which then inevitably become inputs for other people's internal architects. It means creators need to be incredibly intentional
Intentional about what?
about the quality and the potential impact of what they add to that collective pool of ideas and influences. It really compels us to be conscious architects, not just of what we consume for ourselves, but critically, of the ingredients we choose to introduce into the collective imagination.
Knowing that every original thought we put out there becomes potential input, potential raw material for countless others.
We are, in a very real sense, shaping the future informational and cultural landscape piece by piece.
Exactly. So Redefine Imagine, while incredibly powerful on the how-to of generating novelty, really leads us directly, inescapably, into this vital ethical landscape. The power of the internal architect comes bundled with a significant burden of responsibility.
And this brings us, I think, to a really crucial point about how we might need to redefine success when we're applying these principles.
Yes, absolutely. How do we measure success if it's not just about going viral?
Because Redefine Imaginify, as we said, offers this framework for cultivating ideas that, yeah, they might confuse algorithms at first, but they have the potential to become the most impactful, maybe even the most viral ideas in the long run.
Which naturally compels us to rethink what success truly means in this context. Is it just about the reach, the numbers, the likes?
Or something else.
Yeah, we need to propose, I think, a fundamental shift in the metrics we use. Rather than merely focusing on reach or virality or those traditional engagement metrics, the ethical discussion really centers on defining success through the quality and the ethical implications of the novelty itself.
Okay, explain that more. Quality and ethical implications as metrics.
If the conscious architect can systematically encourage the creation of genuinely original concepts, these new patterns, new pathways of thought, what is their ethical duty then to consciously consider the long-term societal and cultural impact of those innovations?
So it's not just asking, did it go viral?
No, it's asking what kind of viral was it? Did the idea as it spread foster deeper understanding? Did it encourage critical thought? Did it build bridges? Or did it inadvertently contribute to more division, more superficiality, more noise?
What would an ethical metric even look like in practice for a novel idea? That sounds hard to quantify.
It is hard to quantify, certainly harder than counting likes or shares.
Right.
But it would involve a deep, proactive consideration of the idea's potential ripple effects before and during its release. For instance, maybe instead of celebrating 1 million shares for a really provocative, maybe divisive take that just gets outrage clicks, perhaps we, as creators and as a culture, should learn to celebrate, say, 1,000 shares of a deeply insightful, maybe complex, but ultimately unifying perspective.
Yeah.
Something that sparks genuine dialogue and constructive thought, even if it doesn't explode in the same way numerically.
So the success isn't just in the sheer volume of the spread.
But in the nature of that spread, and the quality of the collective thought or feeling it stimulates. This encourages creators, hopefully, to move beyond chasing simple engagement metrics and embrace a deeper sense of responsibility.
Responsibility for what, exactly?
For the potential profoundly reshaping of collective thought, culture, and understanding that truly novel ideas can achieve. And they achieve this precisely because, as Innovationaries points out, humans recognize the novelty. We're drawn to that distinctiveness.
And with that attraction comes a profound responsibility.
A responsibility for the impact of the distinctiveness itself.
Yeah.
What does your unique contribution actually do in the world?
Okay, so for you listening right now, maybe thinking about this framework, wrestling with these deep ethical dimensions, what can you actually do differently? How do you apply this practically, but also responsibly in your own creative work, or maybe just in your problem solving?
Yeah, that's the crucial question, isn't it? How does this translate to action? I think the big shift, fundamentally, is in your mindset. It's about moving towards being deliberately intentional, proactive, and deeply responsible in how you approach creativity.
Not just setting the stage for inspiration to strike.
No, but thoughtfully considering the potential ripple effect of what you create and what you choose to put out into the world. It's about transforming what might seem like ignored moments or random inputs into powerful tools, while also recognizing that your creations, especially the novel ones, become potent forces of influence, for better or worse.
Okay, let's maybe unpack some concrete starting points then for being this conscious and responsible architect. Where do you begin?
All right, practical steps. First, actively seek out those liminal spaces we talked about earlier and use them intentionally. Don't just endure them.
So that waiting room, the airport lounge, the time stuck in traffic.
Don't just see it as wasted time. See it as a profound opportunity to deliberately free your mind. And here's a really crucial tip, maybe the hardest part. Resist the urge to immediately grab your phone.
Guilty.
We all are,
Mm-hmm.
but try to put it away. Just let your mind drift. Look around. Notice weird details, snippets of conversation floating by, the way the light hits something mundane. Turn that downtime into active mind-wandering time. See what connections your brain makes when it's not being constantly fed directed input from a screen. You might genuinely be surprised at the novel ideas or solutions that just bubble up in those quiet in-between moments.
I know that's easier said than done in our world, but the potential payoff sounds significant. Okay, what about the other side, cultivating that effortless attention, the nature connection?
Be just as intentional about that. You don't necessarily need a grand wilderness expedition. Carve out small moments for nature or even just quiet observation. Maybe it's just sitting by a window watching the rainfall for 5 minutes.
Or noticing the leaves on a tree in a park during your lunch break.
Exactly. Or just listening to birdsong without distraction. The key is effortless attention. No specific goal, no problem to solve, just allowing your mind to gently observe and rest. Let your gaze sweep across a landscape. Listen to ambient sounds without judgment. This is essential mental recovery. Think of it as a proper cognitive reset button.
Creating space.
It creates mental spaciousness for ideas to connect, it declutters your mental workspace, and it genuinely recharges your creative batteries. It's about cultivating an internal calm that allows those deeper, quieter insights to finally emerge.
Okay. And then the input side. Mindful narrative cross-pollination, but crucially with that added layer of ethical reflection. This seems like where the rubber really meets the road for the responsibility piece.
It absolutely does. And this takes conscious discipline, real effort, and most importantly, that ethical reflection component. Deliberately diversify your mental diet. Go way beyond your usual comfort zone.
So if I typically love thrillers,
Try reading surrealist poetry for a week. Or dive into a biography of someone from a completely different culture or era. If you primarily watch comedies, maybe try a complex, slow-burn foreign drama or a deep-sea documentary about bioluminescence, or spend time exploring historical fashion archives online.
seek the clash.
Seek the clash, seek the friction between styles, ideas, eras. Remember the example, cyberpunk and Renaissance art. And it's the vital ethical layer as you seek out these dissonant inputs and as you feel your mind starting to synthesize them, consciously ask yourself some questions.
Like what?
Like, what's the real essence here in these different inputs? How does this resonate with or maybe challenge universal human values? If I synthesize something new from this collision, what's its likely impact going to be? Is it constructive? Is it potentially uplifting or clarifying? Or could it inadvertently be harmful or divisive? Does it foster understanding or deepen misunderstanding?
Wow. So you're proactively considering the ethical implications of your creative choices right at the input and synthesis stages, before the idea is even fully formed or shared.
Exactly. It's not just about consuming different things anymore. It's about actively filtering and reflecting on them through an ethical lens as you integrate them into your own thinking and creating. And then finally, there's the big picture mindset shift. The overall approach to your entire life, really.
How so?
It's about reframing how you see everything you engage with. Consuming content, experiencing the world, having conversations. It isn't just for enjoyment or information anymore. It's all potential raw material.
You become an active forager.
An active forager for your internal architect. You're constantly, consciously building this vast, diverse mental library of bits and pieces, fragments of ideas, emotional tones, structures, all ready to be remixed in novel and hopefully responsible ways. Your whole life, if you approach it intentionally like this, becomes a continuous wellspring of potential inspiration.
And with that wellspring
comes the continuous responsibility to steward its flow ethically. Recognizing that what you choose to put out, especially if it's truly novel, has the power to shape the collective imagination, for better or for worse.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive today, using Redefine Imaginify and innovation areas, we've gained, I think, a really specific, almost tactical view of where inspiration and novelty can come from.
Yeah, much more concrete than just waiting for the muse.
Definitely. It clearly suggests that creativity is not just some random luck of the draw. It can be systematically encouraged, even cultivated. It can be sparked by environments like those disruptive liminal spaces or restorative moments in nature.
And fueled by that active narrative cross-pollination, using diverse, even clashing, works intentionally to create productive friction between ideas.
And all of this potentially leads to something genuinely new, something that might even have a unique edge online precisely because it defies easy categorization by algorithms, but connects with human curiosity.
Exactly. And this entire framework, this powerful set of tools, coupled with the profound ethical considerations we've layered on top of it today,
Okay.
it leaves us, and hopefully you, the listener, with a really fascinating, maybe even slightly uncomfortable question to chew on. Well, if creativity is so shaped by these external things, the disruptive places, the restorative nature, the clashing inputs we choose, is creativity mostly just about getting really good at setting up the right external triggers? Is it mainly about optimizing your surroundings and your media diet? Is the real skill purely about mastering the outside world?
Or is the really deep work primarily internal? Is it more about building our own capacity, strengthening that internal architect within us, the ability to actively find those inputs, yes, but then to choose wisely among them, to synthesize them skillfully, to make original meaning, and to consciously cultivate the inner world of our judgment, our values, our discernment?
And perhaps the biggest question this whole exploration provokes is, where does the balance truly lie between that external influence and the internal cultivation, especially when we factor in the significant ethical weight of our creations in today's world?
Is the real skill maybe navigating that intricate interplay, mastering both the external triggers and the internal synthesis, while simultaneously taking profound conscious responsibility for the outputs that inevitably shape the collective imagination?
It's a lot to think about.
It really is. We really hope this deep dive has given you a lot to consider as you go about architecting your own inspiration, consciously and responsibly.